everyone, and welcome to Writers Drinking Coffee. This is a podcast where writers are sitting around drinking tasty beverages and talking about writing, publishing, and the whole creative process. There will be rants and raves and opinions that do not agree but are lovingly delivered. We do not censor ourselves, so consider us PG-13. Today's writing brunch is John Schmidt, our guest host Cynthia Moore, and me, Jeannie Warner. This is episode 158, interview with Keegan Patterson. Welcome, Keegan.
Welcome.
Now, what are your pronouns so that I don't mispronounce them or misgender you in any way?
Not a problem. It's he, him.
Fantastic. Welcome. I have to say that the first thing that when John introduced me, I know that you two have been friends for a long time.
Yeah.
I loved that you had a tagline on your website saying world's okayest accountant. I've been laughing and giggling for hours since I saw that.
Yeah. So what's funny is when I was in high school, I remember this, God, like it was yesterday. My dad really wanted me to be an engineer like him. And the reality is I just have never thought of myself as being quite that nerdy and smart, like nerdy in the good way, in the smart way.
As a longtime friend of yours, I have to say, man, you got to get your ego back up to
I know,
reality.
right? Seriously, that's why I'm writing this book. So I always kind of thought of myself as more of a business student than an engineering student, and that's how I ended up in accounting. Although that was kind of a twisty road too, just about everything else in my life. So
I feel you. I heard my parents with business stories every day, and I was convinced the one thing, oh my God, I didn't want to end up in business. So, Here we are.
Yeah. Well, and I my thinking at the time was, it's a good career. Everybody needs an accountant. You can, pretty much work just about anywhere. Of course, now you can even do it online. So it's even that much easier. So I'm not, unhappy with it, but it's nice to have this outlet to my creativity. So.
Well, that pivots brilliantly into the question of you have been writing novels. Or starting to write novels or engaging in the process of writing novels. As a first-time novelist, tell us a little bit about where that flows from. Is it from staring at charts of numbers or staring at the people and saying, wow, have you guys got stories?
Can you write a novel about accounting as your first novel?
So actually, technically yes, because it will end up being the second novel, but Roadworthy, which is the one where I quit my accounting job and go on a motorcycle ride across the Western United States. That was actually it. And I write about my boss who, and this is actually true. He actually kept like 3 sets of books. In the story, I keep it just to 2, just to make it a little bit more believable. But yeah, so I basically quit my job in a ball of fury and write him this angry note and send off a bunch of stuff to the IRS and the Franchise Tax Board, go on a ride with this guy who I have a desperate crush on, only to be
wait, don't tell us.
Well, yeah,
the story evolves in the book, but I do have a question for you.
Yes
And it's a very not important question.
Okay.
You describe your protagonist motorcycle as a BMW touring motorcycle.
Yes.
Which model is it?
The R1200. It was an 09 R1200. It was brand new.
I knew you'd know, but I think you should tour on GSs. They're much better in the rain. But you know what? We could argue this for 2 hours.
Yes, that's a separate. I tell you what, I'll do a special episode of my podcast and we can come on and talk about motorcycle touring. I would love to do that. That would be amazing.
Okay.
But in all seriousness, yeah, I did. And it really was, I will tell you, my friend was on a Honda CBR 600, crouched over and arthritic after every ride. And, I would get off and be like, okay, what are we doing now? Like, let's do this. But talking about a self-rescuing heroine or a self-rescuing princess.
How to engineer a self-rescuing princess.
Yes. And that's it. And I'm like, that's why I couldn't land the plane, because that's the problem. He had to get out of his own damn way. And I, at the time, because that character is based on me, I hadn't made that realization yet. And so I couldn't land the plane because I hadn't got that far enough in my own life experience to be able to write the story. So that's why that one's been on hold for so long. But now that I know how that ends, and I have a plethora of material for my current project, which is Trustworthy, that I think these first two will probably happen in pretty quick succession. So
We have done interviews with a bunch of people that are involved with writing memoirs, writing, biographies, etc. I really like this twist of saying, sure, I'm going to write it and I'm going to call it fiction, but it's basically what happened. I mean, that's what I do with my Bluebird novels, but
yeah.
She's a serial killer, so I'd like to pretend that isn't real.
Well, and there's some legal issues that I may or may not encounter in this first book. I've had some conversations about that. So, there'll be some things that I will want to fictionalize. There will be some things that, just for the sake of my own, what's left of my own privacy and so forth.
By legal issues, I take it you don't want anybody to get mad at you and call it libel and other things that are thrown around.
No. Oh God, I hope someone sues me. Oh my God, I would love it. Love it, love it, love it, love it.
I mean, it's a lot of free press.
That's exactly it. So, I'm not actually worried about it because it's true. It's not libel if it's true. So you can't get mad at me for shit that you did that you're now kind of wishing you hadn't done or you're embarrassed about.
Are you changing the names to protect the guilty, or are you just?
Yes. Oh yeah. So in the book, for sure. Oh yeah, all the names are changed, and it will be different enough where you won't be able to recognize necessarily. But I mean, it's really obvious if you Google my name and look for the marriage records in Washington State. You'll find my marriage record, and then you know who that is. I'm not suggesting anybody do that, but it's not that hard.
Oh, we're totally going to do that. It's just
added a note.
I know, right?
And then we're going to drop it out of the podcast, so we're not putting that.
Well, it is a little bit. So that's actually a funny story. So this is an absolutely true story, and this is kind of why I decided to do this. I realized how just completely abnormal the last 3 years of my life have been. When I tell these stories and I did these things just like it was nothing. I smuggled a marriage certificate into a prison.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it was badass.
I thought I was more about that as well.
Yeah. Smuggle files or ways to
cigarettes,
smuggle ways to become more.
Oh, there were other things too, but again, I think, like I said, this is the part where it's like, oh, liability. But the character, let's do this. We'll just say the character's name is Anthony Gallagher. So in the book, yeah, and he kind of, and some of it is, a lot of it is just stories that some of these guys told me about stuff too, where I've kind of incorporated those things. Yeah, I realized just how abnormal that is. That two things. One, that I believed his reasoning for why he wanted me to do that. His logic was that because his prison counselor, quote unquote, or his the case manager basically wouldn't approve it. And the reason she wouldn't approve it is because she saw the truth, because she sees all of his emails. And so, but I didn't know that. And he had me believing that there was this, that the prison is really, it's not gay friendly. And I'm sure that there's probably some of that, but that he used that to keep me from recognizing the truth more quickly or really kind of accepting it. He always kind of had a convenient story for everything. And I wasn't a hard sell. I really wanted to believe the things that he was telling me. And so that's kind of the genesis of the podcast and thus the book, is that I'm trying to reach other people like me, but that haven't made these just enormous mistakes. Now, I'm lucky that I made it out through the other end relatively in one piece, but I do kind of want it to serve as sort of a warning, like, hey, if you're engaging in some of these same kind of deceptive behaviors, if you're lying about a lot of stuff, if you're hiding things from people, if you're losing your friends, like there was a bouquet of red flags along the way that I just completely ignored because I wanted to. So part of, and the other part of it too is just kind of working out my own stuff. And it's been really, it's nice to be able to just say, you know what, I did these dumb things. Look at this dumb email that I sent.
So we got a question for you then.
Yes.
So I keep thinking back to what you said about, even though you've changed names and such, it's a veneer over actual events that happen. My question is, how cathartic is this writing for you? I imagine some level there.
I just got goosebumps. No, it's really, really cathartic. And I would love it if I had 1 million downloads on my podcast. I so tickled pink that I think the first episode has been more than 50 downloads so far. I love that. That's about 45 more than I thought would download it. So
I'm going to bring that up. So allow me to break in for a moment and say,
yes.
For Prison Pimp. I really liked it.
Excellent. Thank you.
You talked about, for one, just the opening system. I had a stepfather that ended up in prison, and I used the evil, horrific JPay system in which they fleece families that have already spent all of their money on prisons and defense and lawyers.
Yes.
Some people don't realize when they're still on parole and they put that bracelet around your leg that you technically are renting that bracelet, so you're paying for the honor.
Yes, all of it.
I know. And so I love that I wasn't sure what to go in looking at the title, Confessions. But I wanted,
probably good, because I kind of want you to have a little bit of an open mind when you come in. So I'm glad you said that. That's good.
I think I wanted to say, for those listening, looking for a little bit of just bare in your face, this is the way it is. It is really good, tragically nonfiction.
Yeah.
I think we were all delighted when the JPay founder, Ryan Shapiro, was indicted for security fraud this year.
Yes.
And other shenanigans, because sort of you described it beautifully when you're like, beware of when there's somebody that's asking you to do bad things and things that you shouldn't do.
Yeah.
Do people realize that is also executive behavior at certain levels in certain organizations?
Yeah. Well, and what's funny, the other thing that I think has really been helpful is, and I kind of want to maybe even do like a panel or something, but I see a lot of parallels between my experience with Daniel and the people that are Trump supporters, if you'll forgive me. This kind of cultish, like, I got to have a flag to prove my loyalty to this man and this party, and I'm just going to believe all these crazy things when everybody else is like, no, the vaccine really is not full of computer chips, and no, you really shouldn't look at an eclipse straight up without a special filter, and just all the crazy things that we did. Yes, COVID is real. Yes, you can. You know what I mean? Like, just all the things we can just rant off that are cathartic. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I said we know about the conspiracy theories.
Oh my gosh, all of them. You can rattle off all the conspiracy theories, and every single one of them, you just say, but that's just not logical. Like, if you really think about the logic.
I have a theory about that.
Yes.
I worked on video game design for a while.
Yeah.
And one of the key components of video game design, an excellent video game, if you will, or an excellent role-playing game, if you will. The point is that you're telling a story that engages your audience, and there are structures to that storytelling that bring your audience in and carry them. And there's this artificial concept in video gameplay where a person latches on to a component that seems like a clue. Now, that clue is usually cryptic, and it leads there. But people wrap their arms around it because it makes you feel like you're part of a secret.
Yes.
And part of a secret makes you feel important. And being that you feel important and you feel like you're in this secret club, it's a way to carry people along in something that doesn't mean anything for ages and ages. As video game designers, we try to prevent that, but it is a phenomenon that happens that we see.
That is okay. So again, totally, I'm not even playing. Totally got goosebumps listening to you talk about that. That is exactly it. And that's part that there's two sides of that equation. This doesn't work without both the seller and the buyer. You have to have a willing buyer, and you have to have a guy who's selling snake oil and someone who really wants to believe that snake oil is going to cure all their ails. And that's literally what I did with Daniel. Is I thought my deepest, darkest fear is the fear of being abandoned. And I thought if I really just worked on it for 2 years without anything to get in the way of, other than just, phone calls and all that, that I could really establish trust with this person and that he would never leave me. And what happened was so much darker that it would be criminal for me to not tell my story and hopefully reach somebody that it doesn't even have to be a prison relationship. It could just be a straight up abusive relationship or a cult or a Trump supporter or whatever, and point is there is life after that. And there are people that will love you and accept you no matter what. And they see, that's the whole point of redemption, is that you forgive yourself, you recognize your mistake, and you say, I'm not going to do that again. I'm not going to go mess around with people that have criminal records and ignore signs that are just so blatantly obvious that everybody else, my therapist fired me, for God's sakes. You know how messed up you have to be, right?
Yeah, you do. But you clearly have the material. You certainly have the storylines.
And it's all written. It's so perfect.
Tell me about the tools. Where did you start? Did you start with a notebook?
Yes.
Start blogging? Where did you start in this whole, I think I have a novel inside me?
So I was thinking about that, and I flashed on the very first time I got positive feedback I was probably about 10, and I had a paper route for the San Mateo Times. I grew up on the coast side, and so I'm a Barrie local, and this one family stiffed me. And I just wrote them the sassiest, most sarcastic, really, you guys have the biggest house on the street and you couldn't pay a 10-year-old, like $5 or whatever it was.
I want my $2.
Yes, seriously, that was literally me. That was actually a couple years before me, but yes, pretty exactly. It was exactly $2. And so, and just all through school, I loved writing essays. I was not a big reader, and I know that's kind of a sin, but I've kind of rationalized with that, with the fact that I think I do kind of do better as sort of a fiction, nonfiction writer, if that's a genre. Taking things that are really close to the truth and tweaking them a little bit and extracting the kind of juicy bits out of it. The tool that I started actually, and I actually tried to do a NaNoWriMo at one point, is Scrivener. I love Scrivener because of the way it organizes the project. I even actually use it for the podcast too. I write about 5,000 words a week for the podcast. The other thing that for this one in particular, because like I said, everything is so documented because he was in prison, I have a lot of emails. And so I've been using, and it's called Aeon Timeline, AEON. They're not sponsoring me to say that, but I wish they would, because I love your software and I would be happy to go on and on and on about how awesome it is. In terms of this, it really helped. There was such an overwhelming amount of information that I had. I had thousands of emails, hundreds of voicemail calls, videos, and just everything else that allowed me to kind of put everything, kind of sort out the stuff that was really not important at all. And then whatever was left, kind of put it in a nice orderly timeline. And did I mention I actually started that for my annulment proceedings, but I realized very quickly that the story that I was telling the judge exactly lined up with the story arc that I want to tell for the novel.
Well, it's your first audience, it's a beta reader.
Well, and that's kind of the thing. I thought, she proved the annulment, so she liked some of my writing, I guess.
I was going to ask, are you a jazz writer then, or classical writers? So we used to ask if people are pantsers or plotters, but it's a point. Pantsers kind of rude. So jazz is chock full of improvisation versus classical is more structured. And you mentioned timeline.app. So I'm thinking more structured, but
Oh, very much. The other thing that I didn't mention, and this kind of ties back to my accounting background, is I've been using the story grid, which involves spreadsheets. And I love spreadsheets, love them. Can't get enough. So I have all of my plot mapped out on a spreadsheet, so I know that every chapter has the proper story arc. Every act has a story arc. The whole novel has a story arc. The other three novels behind it have a story arc, and all of it ties in together.
that's as long as you fire the gun on the mantelpiece, Chekhov would be proud, I think.
I think so, and but for the technology, I don't know how I would do it. I was trying to imagine me with 1,000 pieces of paper, like Woodward and Bernstein, trying to figure out like that scene where they're in the library and it very slowly like zooms out up into the top of the roof, and you see all these index cards, and I'm like, I couldn't do that. But like I said, it's like you set it and forget it, and then it just lays it out, and it's magic. It's nice. It takes 2 seconds, and you get to see your whole thing. It's really nice.
Have you tried short stories to get the little vignettes out, or are they easier or harder than just telling the full arc?
That has been the magic of the podcast, is that I have a weekly deadline for myself. It is public, so if I miss my deadline, everybody knows, and that looks bad, and people get mad about that. They expect to see that consistency. And as I said, so that has kind of been my sort of couch to 10K, is writing my 5,000 words a week for the podcast. As I get that muscle strengthened a little bit more, probably another 3 or 4 episodes into it, then I'll be able to have more capacity to write for the actual novel and get that going. So that's my plan. So we'll see.
So that's Confessions of a Pimp. Tell us about the con game, which you have a set up on your webpage.
But yeah, my ex would set me up with these other people, usually other like prison wives, that needed a ride, and so I would give them a ride because I was coming from down here in Longview all the way up to Seattle or past Seattle. It turns out some of them were smuggling drugs, and I didn't know it. And of course, there's no way I'd be able to prove that. Like, it would completely look like I was involved in that, and I would expect the prison to think that I was. But the honest to God's truth is I wasn't. But I know now that that's what was happening. So it's little things like that you just kind of sit back and go, oh, yeah.
Well, each one of those in its own way is a little short story. It's a moment. It's that vignette of
and that's kind of the other thing about the podcast, is that even so, when I sat down with my story grid, there were so many stories and vignettes that didn't make the cut. And so that's kind of what the podcast is it's sort of recycling. It's like when you make donuts and you cut out the perfect circle and it's the leftover dough. Well, I'm taking that leftover dough and making biscuits out of it, and those biscuits are going to be damn good. I was thinking about this, like if there's so much material, I honestly could see a sort of like a Breaking Bad meets Love After Lockup kind of a TV show almost. There's that much material here that it would sort of be something along those lines. I don't know. I actually did have
So if you've heard of the book World War Z, the movie was great, but the book itself is written as a series of journal entries, almost dossier style, as if a military researcher or UN peacekeeper is coming in and writing an after-action review of what happened during the day. I feel like it lends itself really well because it's almost clinical, but it's still talking about these fraught, emotional, like intense observations. And I feel like that third person view of what happened might be an interesting twist.
Well, and so thank you for saying that, because that was actually going to be the thing that I was going to ask you all, if you had any ideas on comps. I've been reading about how you're supposed to find similar books to yours in a similar genre. And obviously that would be like more, I guess, kind of science fiction-y, but yeah, that was actually something I was going to ask, is if you could think of any comps that.
I think there can be. I don't have an answer off the top of my head, but you've given me an interesting little thing to think down and write on. So
perfect.
Touched on that one. So what are you working on right now?
So right now I've got literally this week, I'm working on the 4th episode of the podcast. That's going to be a fun one because I'll have actual audio recordings of some of our prison calls. So if you've never, Jeannie, you'll probably recognize the pre-recorded, message that plays out before the person is connected and all that. But so I'm going to do a podcast about that. My plan is to do about 12 episodes, sort of in this kind of like you said, clinical, almost forensic audit style. And then, because at that point, I will actually have myself at the start of the book. I may kind of transition to either reading excerpts from the book, or more likely probably taking similar stories that still aren't going to be in the book, but maybe kind of tying them to the book. So the idea being kind of the podcast.
We should definitely go have a BarCon, you and I, because you and I have almost polar opposite in life view. For instance, you had the, kind of innocent of all of this. And I'm the sort of person that as I'm driving towards the Canadian border, I'm like, do you think it's true that they can listen inside the car 1 mile out? And so I will start saying things in the car just to find out if I get the car searched. Sorry about that, Dave.
Well, I have had my car searched at the Canadian border, and it was not pleasant. Let me tell you.
It's happened to me 3 times for 3 different reasons. All of them were funny.
Yeah, same here.
All of them were funny for you.
Well, yeah.
Well, yes. Yeah. Fair enough. Yeah. My ex was not pleased. No. So anyway, so the podcast, so that's kind of the sort of immediate, the podcast, and then kind of over the fall working on the novel to that list. I'd like finish by the fall or by the end of the year, or at least have a maybe a first draft anyway by the end of the year.
What advice would you give somebody who hasn't started writing their first novel and has just collected a lot of these, let's call them relationship stories or life stories, that realizes these are a narration, these are a book?
A couple of things. First of all, never ever give up on yourself. But at the same time, you can also give yourself permission to walk away from the project. If you've ever had a really bad case of insomnia, there's no point in lying in your bed trying to force yourself to go to sleep. It doesn't work like that. So sometimes you have to go and do something else to, a season without growing anything in it, to let it rejuvenate.
Lying fallow is the technical
lying
term.
fallow. Thank you. I wasn't sure, but anyway, yes, lying fallow. Let it go fallow and let that kind of germinate. So definitely don't give up. Don't give yourself the space to walk away from it, and do what works for you. Do listen to. That's the thing that I love about your podcast, is that I see that there are so many different ways to do it. Don't give in to the imposter syndrome. You'll probably, if you're starting out, you'll probably hear that talked about a lot. That's where you feel like, I'm not a writer, I'm an accountant.
I think we've said the quote before of there are 99 ways of constructing tribal lives, and every single one of them is right.
That's right. Even if, for example, my ex, Daniel, could tell his version of the story, and it would still be a completely different story than the story that I'm going to tell. So even if you are writing about the same thing as somebody else, you're going to have a different view on it. And if you're feeling blocked, then, like I said, either try something else, or try talking to, other smart people that are writers and readers, and get their feedback and talk to them and see what they think, and, go to a writing group or maybe join a book club or something. But there's a lot of things, I think, on Facebook, and Meetup has a lot of those where like writers groups will get together and then they kind of workshop each other's materials, and it can be really helpful. So definitely don't give up. Give yourself space to take some time if you feel that's right. More importantly than that, never, ever give up. That's the number one piece of advice.
That's the truth. Well, we will put links to the things we've mentioned during this podcast on our website, which is www.writersdrinkingcoffee.com. Thank you, Keegan, so much for coming with us today.
Well, thank you. And thank you for having me. It has been such a pleasure chatting with you. And I know some of your listeners may have more questions than answers. So please do come visit the podcast and let me know what you think.
KeeganPatterson.com. We will have it in our liner notes. And thank you again for listening to Writers Drinking Coffee, a labor of love and enthusiasm put together by the hosts. Our main web support magic is brought to you by Deirdre Schween, and our sound engineer and backup web spiders are David Welsh and John Schmidt. Our intro music is Pretty Maid Milking a Cow, and our exit music is Breakfast with the Morning Person, both by Michael Engberg. You can hear more from Michael Engberg on manyhatsmusic.com. Our podcast sponsors are Jackal Design, The Bean Scene, and Arm Street in Ukraine. And hey, thanks for listening.